just because he wasn't gay. He was targeted by the runaway girl in the car. Henry resignedly got off the bus, but the girl followed close behind and briskly walked up to him, accusing him of stalking her. Henry politely denied that he didn't want to have anything to do with the stumbling girl, but she stood in the way and wouldn't let him go. She saw that Henry was mild-mannered and wanted to extort a sum from him, but no matter how much he entangled, the other party never wavered. Eventually, Henry couldn't take it anymore and warned the girl to let her respect herself. But this kind reminder completely angered the girl. He stood behind Henry and cursed unwillingly, thinking that the two would never cross paths again. But he didn't expect fate to let them meet again. The next day they met again in the crowd, and this time the girl did not show Okafisness, but borrowed $10 from Henry in a faint, trembling voice. Her eyes flashed with helplessness and embarrassment, and her words revealed the desolation of being hungry and homeless. When Henry saw this, an inexplicable sense of compassion welled up in his heart. But instead of taking out the money immediately, he decided to take the girl home. It's a suffocating little room, cramped, with little room for a pull-out sofa bed. He gently handed the girl a sandwich and juice in his hand, trying to give her some warmth, in his own way. Before the girl could utter a fierce word, Henry suddenly reached for her sock. The girl hastened to stop him, thanking him for his sandwich and juice. But she said that if she had to do something else, she would have to pay extra. However, Henry didn't have the bad intentions she had imagined. He just noticed the bright red slap marks on the girl's face and the shocking scars on her arms. His eyes were full of softness and concern, and he gently asked the girl if she needed help. But the girl didn't seem to appreciate it. She coldly told the boy that if he didn't want to spend the night together, he would leave immediately. But Henry didn't pay any attention to the girl's words. He just carefully cleaned every scar for her. The girl's heart was full of confusion. She didn't understand why the strange Henry was so gentle. Henry didn't say much warm words, but silently handed the girl his soft towel and motioned for her to take a shower and change into clean clothes. Later, he gave up the only bed in the house to the girl and slept on the floor. The girl looked at Henry in a trance, and an inexplicable feeling swelled up in her heart. This was the first time in her life that she had been treated so gently. The girl finally realized that perhaps this Henry had no intentions for her, and that his casual care and warmth brought a glimmer of hope to her dark life. Henry is a substitute teacher like no other. He has never been in one school for long, always changing places every month. This time he was substitute for a group of problem students who are unruly and didn't pay any attention to the teacher. Here, fights and brawls are commonplace, and threats and verbal abuse of teachers are commonplace. But the principal can only swallow his anger and maintain the stability of the school. Today was Henry's first class, and he stood at the door of a classroom to take a breath and adjust his mind before entering the classroom. At the first meeting, Henry made a rule: if students didn't want to pay attention, they could just leave the classroom. But as soon as Henry's words were finished, one of the students spoke out in a bad way. Instead of getting angry at the student's unreasonable provocation and rantedal, Henry asked the student who had insulted him to leave the classroom in a detached manner.
Guess what? Right now?
He calmly explained that he was not angry at all. However, this approach does not seem to have had the desired effect. Before Henry's introduction was over, a black boy angrily walked up to the podium. He picked up Henry's briefcase and slammed it against the wall. In the face of such a malicious provocation, Henry only said, bye, lightly. It doesn't have any feelings.
It's empty.
Then let me feel your leadership. I can accept this fact calmly.
I understand you're angry. Okay, I get it. You have no
With just a few simple words, Henry not only skillfully left the steps for the student, but also easily calmed his restlessness.
I'm going to ask you to just...
In this class, he did not stick to the teaching of textbook knowledge, but arranged an essay in an ingenious way. He asked the students to write a eulogy from the perspective of their loved ones on the premise that if you pass away. Although this request may seem absurd, it actually contains profound educational implications. Because this is a school that specializes in accepting students with problems. How can they realize the meaning of listening to lectures when they can't even find the direction of their lives? Henry knew that only by touching their hearts and arousing their emotional resonance could they be guided to re-examine their own value in life. After school, everyone left the classroom, except for the girl who was criticized and did not want to go home. She timidly asked the teacher, "When school is out, are you helping me by driving away the classmate who scolded me?" Despite Henry's explanation that he was driving away the troublesome students, the girl remained, convinced that her instincts could not be wrong. She acquiesced in her mind that the teacher might be interesting to her, but in order to avoid unnecessary trouble, she didn't explain further. Because he is afraid to discuss emotional issues with others easily, this loneliness gradually deepens. Because Henry felt that he was an outlier and could not fit into the life of a normal person at all. Ever since he was sensible, he had never seen his father. As a young child, he also witnessed the abuse of his weak mother, but he was powerless to stop it. In his memory, he depended on his mother and grandfather for their lives. However, when night fell, his mother would whisper to him to lock the door. The fear and helplessness in his mother's tone confused Henry, but he was too young and ignorant to do so. Soon after, the mother chose to sleep in unbearable pain. She took a lot of drugs, lay quietly in bed, and never woke up. And my grandfather also became delirious after this tragedy and spent the rest of his life in a daze. As a child, Henry couldn't comprehend all this suffering until the years allowed him to piece together those heartbreaking truths. Because of her grandfather's long-term mental and physical abuse of her mother, she couldn't stand it and finally went to a dead end. All of this made Henry feel that his existence was a mistake and that he should not have come to this world. So he wanted to atone for his sins and get rid of his inner torment. He was full of compassion for everyone, but feared that his presence would bring them misfortune. So he only dared to be a substitute teacher, so as not to get entangled with too many people. When Henry returns home, he unexpectedly finds Erica with a strange man. The man looked flustered and behaved suspiciously, apparently making some kind of transaction. A wave of anger welled up in Henry's heart, but he resisted it, made the man pay, and then unceremoniously kicked him out. Erica was shocked by Henry's anger, and she shook her head in fear. However, Henry didn't do anything to her, just coldly told her to change the sheets. His face was full of disappointment and helplessness, as if he was tired of everything in this world. Erica cautiously walked up to Henry, begging him in a trembling voice not to drive him away. However, Henry just calmly told her, "I don't care what you do outside, but you can't do that with me." Eventually, Henry relented, and he couldn't get rid of Erica. Because he knew that the world was not friendly to her. He even bought drugs that were harmful to his body and asked Erica to take them. Henry is like a complex of contradictions. He refuses to give emotion, but he falls into the whirlpool of emotions again and again because of the compassion in his heart. That night, Henry still let Erica sleep in the bed while he made his own bunk. Seeing Henry so considerate of herself, Erica felt a warm current in her heart, and she tried to understand his past. Henry's brow furrowed and fell silent. He was confused by the contradiction of being both afraid of not being understood and being fully understood and being fully understood. The long loneliness has built an insurmountable wall in his heart. There is only his rightful presence here, and no one is allowed to disturb him. Just then, a phone call from the nursing home broke the silence of the night. My grandfather's mental state was out of control again, and he locked himself in the bathroom and at the room, refusing to communicate with the outside world, let alone cooperate with the treatment. When Henry heard the news, he rushed to the nursing home overnight, and outside the bathroom door, he tried every means to calm his grandfather's emotions. Finally, amid his grandfather's gentle persuasion, his grandfather slowly walked out of the bathroom suspiciously. That soon, the calm Henry couldn't help but be angry, because he found that the nurse who took care of his grandfather was actually drunk. This accident also occurred due to the negligence of the nurse. What can it be forgiven? Henry angrily reprimanded the nurse, and the gloomy anger poured out like a torrential rain. and the previous gentle image disappeared in an instant. After a night of self-healing, Henry continued to work the next day with all the heaviness and loneliness on his back. Today's school is still in chaos, and a boy finds a stray cat on the lawn. However, behind him lies a hammer that flickers with cold light. He put the cat in his bag and walked into the gymnasium with mixed emotions. A group of students gathered around him, their faces full of anticipation and excitement. At this critical moment, Henry was keenly aware of the anomaly and rushed forward without hesitation to stop the boy's violent behavior. He questioned why the boy was doing this. Under Henry's piercing gaze, the boy finally confided in his heart. He explained that he felt as if he was bound by an invisible force, and although he tried to break free, he could never find his way. This sentence was like a lightning bolt that struck Henry's heart in an instant, and a trace of trance flashed in his eyes, because he also possessed two souls imprisoned in a cage, because they were both prisoners in this world, and they could not escape the shackles of fate. In class, Henry recited the funeral messages written by the students. Some of the speeches were already written, causing the students to burst into laughter. There are also people who reveal the confusion of life in their words, which makes it difficult to let go. Or whether these speeches were deep or immature, they all resonated with the students. These children are not born poor. They have just forgotten grass in the corner, lacking the love and warmth of their parents in the process of growing up. Therefore, in order to attract the distant and affectionate gaze of their parents, they have to resort to extreme ways to get attention. But if this desire for attention is not properly channeled, they can easily fall into the abyss of boredom and hatred. This is exactly the good intention of Henry to guide this speech with his heart. He wants these children to understand that school is much more than just books. He is also a crucible for sharpening his mind and facing difficulties head-on. In his class, there is no boring word memorization and no AC score rankings. He uses stories as a medium to guide students to gain insight into the blindness and hypocrisy of the world, so that they can learn to think independently and not be swayed by trends. The students gradually enjoyed Henry's class. While Henry was lecturing, the girl sitting in the back row of the classroom quietly captured the teacher's every gesture with a paintbrush. Because she is obese, she has always been the object of ridicule from her classmates. Friends are even more extravagant for her. In order to avoid those harsh scrutiny and ridicule during meals, she preferred to hide in the bathroom. She was afraid of the situation there, but even more afraid of the damage to her heart. The girl has a love for photography and painting. Her work is mostly in black and white. However, every time she showed her work to her father with great anticipation, she was greeted with dislike and cynicism from her father. The denial from her loved ones was even more difficult for her to accept than the ridicule of her classmates.
So what is all this supposed to be? Your tortured soul? Cheerful, like happy with color.
What do you want from me, Dad, besides for me to have been born with a penis?
I don't work all day. Support you and your little creative habits, okay? I've had it with all your little art projects that are...
I don't know what to say, Dad.
Although the girl's heart has long been scarred, now she has a new glimmer of hope, and that is the new teacher Henry. His appearance brought unprecedented throbbing to the girl, but due to the gap in identity, she could only pin this love on the brush. She sketched it on paper, and then carefully hid it in the bottom of her heart. The suave Henry has a fatal attraction to the opposite sex. Even the most beautiful female teacher in the school was not spared. She took the initiative to invite Henry to dinner, and confided her heart in front of this charismatic Henry, venting her dissatisfaction with the school, helplessness and frustration of powerlessness. But what the female teacher didn't know was that although Henry in front of her was glamorous on the surface, he was already in trouble in life behind the scenes. Henry listened quietly to the female teacher's venting, but whenever he talked about his own experiences, he was always vague and avoided talking about his childhood. The dusty memories that flashed in his mind were touched and quickly buried. The female teacher kissed Henry softly, and then he felt her gratitude and respect, because she was willing to listen to his inner voice in this world. When Henry stepped into the house, he was greeted by Erica's sullen figure. Her expression was lonely, her eyes were rants, and the candlelight dinner on the table had lost its temperature. When Erica learns that Henry is having dinner with a female teacher, An indescribable sense of loss crosses her heart. Henry, who had always been good at reading words, had to harden his heart and reaffirm his principles. He explained, "You can live here, you can live here, but don't expect anything from me." But when his eyes fell on the elaborate dinner table, his heart could not help but tremble. Perhaps apathy and detachment are not the best way to solve problems. Although Henry has always kept himself out of the way, deep down he always longs for love and warmth. Early the next morning, Erica made breakfast for Henry. She walked awfully past his pillow. The sunlight she hadn't seen in a long time shining into the room. Through the window, sunlight shines on the dining table. When Henry woke up, he was eating bread with a lazy face, and everything seemed so natural. And he originally thought that this was just a simple return for the girl. But in fact, her heart already belonged. She actually had another purpose. That day, after Henry took Erica to the hospital for a blood test, the two frolicked and strolled through the streets, like a couple in love, choosing each other's favorite small gifts. He bought a beautiful diary for her, hoping that she could record the beautiful things in life, and she chose a simple and elegant ring for him, placing her deep in firm expectations. Erica's appearance, like the warm sun in winter, brings a brilliant color to Henry's gloomy life. He began to taste the food she cooked with her own hands, and began to receive her meticulous care. Under this warm infiltration, Henry's once closed and indifferent heart began to gradually soften. He told Erica that he had come to teach in this strange land because his grandfather lived in a nearby nursing home. "My grandfather is old, and since the death of my mother, the old man has fallen into deep self-blame and guilt. Memories of his past were so painful that he was often delirious. And Henry, as his only relative, is always taking good care of his grandfather. But fate always inadvertently rings the alarm bell of life." One day, an emergency call came from the nursing home, saying that Henry's grandfather's condition had deteriorated dramatically and he was dying. When Erica heard the news, she immediately rushed to the sanatorium to visit. By the time Henry arrived, his grandfather was depressed, muttering Henry's mother's name indistinguishably, ashamed of his mistakes. Hearing these words, he felt very uncomfortable, and Henry first expressed his forgiveness in the tone of his mother.
What do you need to be forgiven for?
When his grandfather learned that his mother had forgiven him, he was relieved. Henry chose to bring the sunshine to others, while he himself suffered the heavy pain. Later, under Erica's constant questioning, Henry opened his heart for the first time and shared with others those buried memories in his heart. That heavy memory came back to him over and over again. The red light in his memory was like a nightmare through the crack in the door, deeply imprinted in the depth of his soul, and became a shackle that he could not shake off for the rest of his life. Henry never wanted to establish deep emotional ties with others because of this sort of fear and anxiety. He fears that his deformed heart will cause irreparable damage to people, so he chooses to be lonely and alienated. I thought that everything around me would be safe and sound, but who knew that things would backfire? After class that day, the girl suddenly gave her photography to Henry. Then she poured out her thoughts to him, and those memories came back like dust in the sun.
Yes, of course I do.
Henry felt a little embarrassed in the face of the girl's hug. He just gently put his arm around her shoulders, deliberately kept the distance between the teacher and the student, and comforted her softly. He reassured her that everything would be fine. At this moment, the female teacher who liked Henry suddenly broke into the classroom. She was ashamed and hurriedly rushed out of the door. Henry instinctively wanted to catch up and explain that it was all a misunderstanding. However, the female teacher questioned him if he was harassing the female students. Henry couldn't contain his anger any longer, and he slammed his desk uncontrollably, explaining the truth of the matter loudly.
What do you think? I'm not some sick old man. Is that what you think of me? I just wanted to help her.
Over the years, he has struggled to control the pain in his heart, trying to find a way to get rid of it. His strategy for controlling suffering is detachment. seeking spiritual liberation through separation and detachment. Therefore, he pushed everyone around him away, because he didn't want to hurt his loved ones in the name of love like his grandfather. After the shock of this incident, Henry was forced to re-examine his inner world, and he deeply realized that perhaps his emotional world was too barren. Faced with the emptiness in his heart, he could not truly free himself from it for the rest of his life. With this self-awareness, Henry chose to sacrifice himself to help others, hoping to find solace and peace of mind in this way. However, when things backfired, he found that all his efforts were in vain. As a result, his clinging psychological defenses began to crumble. Now that he was left with Erica by his side, he knew he couldn't hurt her, so he made a decision. Early one morning, Henry wakes up early and prepares a breakfast for Erica. Erica was keenly aware of Henry's incursional behavior. Confused, he asked, "What happened?" Henry explains that he is used to living alone, so you have to leave. To give you a place to belong, I've contacted the people at the Youth Services Agency. As a determined person, in the midst of the girl's hard-earned pleading, Henry still relented and let the people of the institution take her away. The girl's shouts echoed in the empty corridor, like a poignant tragedy, full of endless sorrow and reluctance. Listening to the fading voice, I can't help but feel a wave of emotion. However, his heart was filled with the pain of the past, like a barren ruin, and could no longer hold anyone's figure. He stared at the small shoes Erica had left behind, and despite his reluctance, he had to draw a line with his heart, because he knew that crossing the line meant more hurt and pain, and he could not afford to repeat the consequences of the same mistakes again. Henry can't heal anyone because he can't heal himself. Loneliness is the beginning of his life, and it is destined to be his end. That day, Henry received a call from the hospital, and the doctor told him that Erica's medical results had come out. The doctor explained in a serious tone that he contacted Erica himself as soon as possible, even though Henry had expected it, and even though he knew that Erica was just a passing visitor in his life. When the moment really came, he still couldn't control his emotions, and his eyes couldn't help but moisten. In the blink of an eye, it was the last day of Henry's substitute teaching, and he said goodbye to the students in class. And he said goodbye. Everyone was depressed, and even the usually naughty little black expressed his reluctance.
The dickhead, I fucks with you.
Yeah.
All the teachers in this place at school.
In fact, Henry could have chosen to stay, but he chose to flee instead, because he knows that once the emotional bond is established, the damage will follow and cannot be avoided. Therefore, he chose to leave here and continue his long journey. Henry walked out of the classroom and saw the girl in the square. Today he deliberately put on makeup and prepared a lot of cakes in the shape of smiley faces. He explained that he wanted to get everyone a taste of his craft at the last minute. Henry didn't understand what the girl meant, and just gave her a diary as a parting gift. The girl wants to give him a piece of cake in return, and Henry wants the unique black, crying face cake. But the girl explains that it is a special gift she has prepared for herself. Afterwards, the girl randomly chose a smiley cake and gave it to him. Henry held the smiley cake in his hand, and his heart was mixed. He remembered the day he pushed the girl away, and couldn't help but apologize to her for what happened that day. But the girl did not want to hear this at all, because her heart was filled with despair. When Henry turned to leave, a decisive glint flashed in the girl's eyes, and she ate the black cake that she had prepared for herself, one bite at a time. The last meal, because in that piece of cake she had already added deadly poison beforehand. It turned out that she couldn't bear the loneliness and pain of life, and couldn't bear the sadness and helplessness of being pushed away by everyone. Her father's disgust and the disdain of her classmates were like heavy shackles that bound her soul and made her breathless. She even hides in the toilet when she eats a burger, for fear of being discovered and ridiculed by others. She admires teacher Henry because Henry is the only one who can understand her, but she misunderstands Henry's good intentions. Until the moment when Henry also pushed her away, she finally couldn't take it anymore. The last glimmer of hope in my heart was shattered. The moment the girl fell to the ground, Henry knew that something had happened to the girl.
It's gonna be okay. Such a responsibility to
The girl's death made Henry understand that detachment is only an unattainable ideal, and that falling into reality is a fate that no one can escape. He tries to withdraw from the materialistic world and break free from the whirlpool of emotions, and in the end he is still mercilessly drawn into it by fate. The word salvation, which once shone with divine light in his heart, is now full of irony. He thought that he could redeem himself by redeeming others. However, reality cruelly tells him that salvation also means sacrifice. He has the ability to regurgitate, making people fall into an endless cycle between giving and receiving. Throughout his life, Henry longed to transcend the object, beyond the desire and emotion, but in the end he was unable to do so. He sat alone by the flower bed and watched as the police car took the girl's body away. He hides in a corner of his own, but the female teacher comes to Henry to comfort him. And Henry took this opportunity to express his life insights. He realizes that everyone is an individual. You are yourself, she is her, and you each have your own destiny. A few days later, as fighter, Henry arrives at the teen center, and when he sees Erica, his dark eyes glow with hope again. He ran to Henry with joy, eagerness as a bird returning home, and hugged him like a child. The afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled on the figures of the two embracing each other, and a dazzling light covered them with a warm halo. This time, Henry didn't push her away, although they are not relatives or lovers magicians, adding rant. From this moment on, they will see each other as the most important person in their lives, beyond the distractions of the story itself. The film also secretly shows a deeper ending. Henry sat alone on the pulpit, reciting The Fall of Usher House in a low voice. The classrooms were desolate, scattered and disorganized. Fallen leaves and waste paper cover the ground, recording the traces of time, as if at this moment to freeze the deep meaning behind the collapse of Usher House. At this moment, the desolate scene in the classroom and the plot in the film complement each other, telling the confusion and struggle between people and souls. The loss of the soul plunges the individual into the abyss of despair, making it difficult to find inner home and peace. And the bond between the soul and the body makes the soul fall into a state of aphasia, unable to truly express the inner desires and emotions. This is exactly what the film wants to convey about the profound exploration questioning human nature and soul. In the autumn of that year, on a dim and dreary day, I rode alone through the gloomy wilderness. As twilight fell, the gloomy house of Usher finally came into view. Strangely, as beyond the wall's greatest magicians, as soon as I saw the house, I felt an unbearable depression in my heart. I'd never seen it before, but the feeling of oppression has penetrated my soul. Looking at the sparse and desolate surroundings, the cold scenery, the decaying walls and withered trees, I could not help but feel frightened and quickly fled the house and the mansion. As I crossed the old stone-paved avenue with trepidation, the wind was still raging all around. Suddenly, a strange light fell from the sky, and I couldn't help but look back, trying to find the source of that light. For I knew that behind me there was only the mansion and its shadow. It turned out that the halo came from a blood-red moon. As I stared desperately, a gust of wind struck, instantly catching the blood-red moon into my eyes. I was dizzy to see that the tall mansion was crumbling, and with it a prolonged cacophony, as if the waves were roaring. The deep, gloomy lake beneath his feet silently submerged the remnants of Usher House. At that moment, my soul was speechless, and the temperature in my heart suddenly cooled, as if it was slowly sinking, and finally I was immersed in endless sorrow and loss.